I interview Michael Jackson's personal photographer, Stephen Whitsitt. We discuss capturing photos of Michael when he was performing at the Super Bowl and live on tour, what it was like photographing Michael for single covers and on short film sets, and the biggest thing he learned from the King of Pop. Stay tuned here on Red Jackson Dance. Joining me now is the wonderful Stephen Whitsitt, who worked as Michael's personal photographer for several years. How are you doing today, Stephen?
I'm great. I'm really well.
Perfect. So glad to have you here with us. So, let's start off by, photography, I imagine it's quite a competitive field, right? What do you think made you stand out as a photographer?
That's a really good question. Um, well, first of all, to address whether it's competitive,
Hmm.
I guess that it's competitive, but I sort of have always felt like I am going to get exactly the number of jobs that I'm going to get, and the jobs that I'm not meant to get, I'm not going to get. So
Right.
I don't feel, I don't feel like I'm in competition with other photographers. I feel like that I'll just get what I'm supposed to get. I I would be dishonest if I didn't say that sometimes when I see one of my peers doing something that I would really love to do, that I don't feel like, oh man, I wish I could be doing that. But
Yeah.
I've had so many amazing things happen over the course of my career that it's like, oh my gosh, I've just been, I maybe on a previous life I pulled a thorn out of a lion's paw or something, but because I just have been so incredibly fortunate that that I can't whinge about anything.
Yeah.
So I think that the things that make me stand out, it's really important that I have authentic interactions with whomever I'm photographing.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, was it yesterday? Day before yesterday, I was doing portraits of university graduates. And even though I'm only photographing them for like 5 minutes per person, I try to have an interaction with them where I ask them about themselves. Where
Yeah.
where I don't just treat them like they're an object. I don't like objectifying things or people and stuff like that. And so a lot of times when I've been doing photo shoots, I've stopped in the middle of it and gotten into a long conversation about some philosophical thing or something like that, because what's more important to me than anything is human interaction,
Right.
and so like I think that, and people really respond to that. I one time, and I can't remember exactly what the context was. I believe it was when we were in New York and Michael was at the Hit Factory, and he would call me up and say, Steve, I want to talk to you. And so I would walk over there and go into his lounge there, and we talked about all kinds of different things. And one time he said, Steve, I always feel really relaxed and really comfortable when you're behind the camera. And I was
Quite a
like, oh my
compliment.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
incredible, and with the work that I do now, I photograph. I do a lot of stuff in politics, and I do a lot of stuff with government. And I shoot fashion, and I still shoot some music stuff.
Really
And people,
versatile then.
yeah, and people just kind of seem to respond to, like, I don't put on a different face when I'm doing photography. What you're seeing, this is authentically who I am, and
Yeah.
it's who I'm going to be when I'm doing photography. I don't suddenly become like Austin Powers and like, oh, you're beautiful, I love you. That
Yeah.
stuff, that kind of, like, just makes my skin crawl. I
Mm.
want to always be who I am, and people seem
Yeah.
to respond to that. So I hope
Definitely.
that answers the question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. That's really interesting. So, at what stage of your career did you first meet Michael?
At the very beginning. So I graduated university, got my degree in photographic illustration in 1990, and I started working as the assistant to his photographer, which that story is kind of a famous story. But one day, so like the way the photographers, at least at that time, the way the photographers started their career is you go and you assist other photographers. And
Yeah.
so I was living in Los Angeles and I was assisting all these different photographers doing all kinds of stuff. And as happens, a community develops and you meet other assistants and you exchange phone numbers and all of that. And one day my phone rang, and it was this other assistant. And he said, "Hey, Steve, can you cover for me on this gig? I can't make it because I have an impacted molar and I got to go to the dentist." Like, sure, I'll cover it. And what that job was it was the first days of shooting the black or white video. And so I went in as the assistant, and it was crazy. I mean, the first day we were shooting, it was when they were doing the Thai dancers and the African dancers, and then a few days later we were shooting the Native Americans out on location in Vasquez Rocks, and it like I just kind of like tripped over my feet, and suddenly I was in this thing. The very first day in the studio walked Paul and Linda McCartney, and I was just completely gobsmacked.
Yeah.
I don't usually get starstruck, but it's like, oh my God, that's Paul McCartney.
It's
That's the
like this
Beatles.
whole other world.
Yeah, and so like I was only at that time, I want to say that was 91 or 92.
Yeah.
And I had graduated college in 1990, so I was very, very
Wow.
early in my career.
Yeah.
And then it was 1994, after coming back from the Dangerous tour, that I got the call to ask if I would be interested in interviewing for the position as the photographer.
Right.
And so I was only 4 years into my career when I started shooting Michael.
That's crazy.
It's
Wow. So,
insane. And I still don't know like I believe it because it happened, and I have the photos to prove
yeah.
it. And it's funny, I was talking to someone recently that was saying, you always act like you didn't deserve to be there. And I do sort of feel like it was, in some ways, it was just like this crazy confluence of events that that allowed it to happen.
Mm.
But it's like, well, I guess that I was supposed to be there because, when I looked Michael in the eye, he was like, "Steve, welcome. I'm glad you're here." And the interactions that I had with him were that he didn't treat me like I was not supposed to be there, but internally, because of self-esteem and things like that, I kind of just always felt like, oh gosh, what am I doing here? Kind of a
Yeah.
little bit like a fish out of water.
Right. That makes
But
sense.
that was good because that kept me hungry and humble and like ready to just sort of like say, okay, well, let's see what happens with this. Let's see how
Yeah.
I do with it. So
Yeah, that's fascinating how like, and I think it's a testament to you as a photographer how early on in your career that happened.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
phenomenal.
it was weird.
Yeah.
But it's what's great about just about that fact is that now when I'm speaking to young artists and photographers, I can tell them, look, you just don't know what is going to happen, and the whole secret is being open
Mm.
and like believing in yourself enough to say, okay, well, like the when I went to do the first test shoot with Michael, they sent me to New York City, and it was like, okay, I can either succeed at this or I can fail at this. Whatever happens, it's completely in my hands.
Yeah.
And so when something is in my hands, it's like, okay, and not like that everything I've ever done has been successful or but it's like, if it's in my hands, I know that I'm going to put forth as much effort and as much of what's coming from my soul as I possibly can. And
Yeah.
that seems to be part of the secret to success. Not that it's a
Yeah.
secret,
It makes you
if that makes sense.
determined then. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, am I right in saying you were part of the Dangerous tour and the Super Bowl then, right? Photographing the live
Yes.
performances.
Yeah.
So,
And this was when I was assisting the other photographer. And
yeah.
so for the Super Bowl, I got put way, way up in the very, very top where the press booth is looking down on the field. And my
Yeah.
job was to shoot like really wide angle images
Mm.
of the whole thing. Um, Sadly, my memories of it aren't like, I was really ill that day. I was just not feeling well at all. And
Yeah.
so I was just barely holding it together. But
The
it
whole
was
days.
extraordinary. And I could have, called in sick, but I wasn't about to do that.
No.
But it was just like, whenever, whenever we did things like that with Michael, whether it was going to a hospital or something like that, or going to one of the award shows, it was just there was this buzz. There was just like this electricity in the air, and that
Mm.
was kind of one of the most intense experiences, just because it was a Super Bowl. It was
All that
Michael.
energy.
It was just out of this world. It was really, really cool.
Yeah. And
So,
when Michael's performing, like, what are you looking for to create a great image?
um, it's not specific to when Michael or when anybody is performing.
Mm.
What I like, what happens, one of the photographers that I trained under was a guy who's probably the single most talented um, music photographer in history. It's a guy named Neil Preston, and Neil Preston was Led Zeppelin's photographer. He was Queen's photographer. He was Springsteen's photographer. He was Madonna's
Wow.
photographer.
Okay.
And you can when I was in his office and you would look in his archives, there isn't a band that you could name that he hadn't photographed. He's just photographed everybody.
Right.
U2 a bunch, The Who,
Mm.
everybody.
Everybody.
And he never took me along and said, Steve, this is what I do, but I'm a very, very observant person. And so I would watch him, and then I would see the images that he would shoot. And what developed in me as a result of that observation is that, first of all, you need to know the music of the person that you're photographing. You need to kind of trust your instinct to be in the right place at when the peak moment is going to happen. You need to have all of your technical stuff on lockdown. You need to know exactly what the exposure is and exactly where the focus is, and all of those things. And then you just have to kind of put all of the other, like, what you had for dinner and what that person said to you last week, and all that. You have to put everything else out of your mind and just clear your brain out, and just
Yeah.
sort of like trust and just know, okay, this moment now. And if you do that 100,000 times, you get better at it. If you do
Yeah.
it 10 times, you're probably not going to be very good at it. But if you do it 100 times, you'll be better than you were at 10 times. If you do it a
Yeah.
thousand times, then you'll be better than at 100. And at this point in time, I've shot like hundreds of thousands of images of musicians in performance, and then tens of thousands of images of that are portraits. And there's something you just sort of like, no, okay, this is the moment.
Yeah.
And not
You just
every
kind of
shot is
feel it
going
in
to
a
be
way.
right. Not, there are going to be some that it's like, oh shit, I went too fast, I went too slow, whatever. You're not every shot is going to be perfect, but the more you do it, the more you know that, oh, the when I first started, 1% of my images were good. A few years in, 10% were. Now
Yeah.
40, 50, 60, 70% are good.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of just repetition.
Yeah.
The same as if somebody's a musician, they play scales,
Yeah.
you
It's
know,
like learning any skill.
yeah, you just kind of do it again and again so that it becomes like muscle memory. So
Right.
I
That
feel
makes
like I'm
sense.
giving really long answers to your questions. I hope it's
No,
okay.
these are great. Yeah, it's really insightful. So, do you recall any like spontaneous moments where, Michael just did something, either, in a performance or on a set, and you like captured it just in time?
Um, Not there were I mean there like one of the shots that I know that this is one of the most famous shots because the fans have nicked it and used it again and again and again and again. And so it was during the Scream video, and basically what was going on was that they were doing the film slash video camera is doing a tight close up of Michael like this,
Okay.
and he's mugging for the camera, and he's like, giving dirty
Mm.
looks and all that. And at one point, he lifts up his middle finger and gives his middle finger to the camera.
Right.
And when I, and I mean, and at this time, this was 1995. I'm shooting on film. So it's like you have a roll of film is 36 exposures. You have 36 chances to get it before you have to hand the camera to the assistant and grab another one or reload it yourself or whatever. So it's not as free as shooting digital where
Yeah.
if I have a 128 gigabyte card in my digital camera, then I can shoot thousands and thousands of
Yeah.
photos and never have to stop and think about it again. So you have to sort of have all the things that I mentioned before, the exposure and the focus and everything in place, and then you have to just go, okay, I need to trust when an incident is going to happen. And like right now on my website, the sale part of my website, you can see contact sheets for sale from that particular moment
Yeah.
in Scream, and it's like you can see all of the different times when he's looking right at me into the camera, when he's looking off, when he's making something with his mouth,
Yeah.
things like that. But the one where he lifts up, and it's one frame where he lifts up and gives me the finger, and it's like, oh my God, that's so cool because it's so out of character for
It
Michael. You
is,
don't,
isn't it?
you
Yeah.
know, it's funny because the Scream, the History album has some songs where Michael expressed his anger,
Yeah.
and certainly in Scream he was expressing his anger, and that's not something that people got to see a lot. And
No,
so
not at all.
to
Yeah.
and to see that visually and to see it represented in something that's usually reserved for when somebody cuts us off on the motorway or whatever, it just was like I knew it was just like a really really special moment.
Yeah.
So that's one.
Yeah.
That's one of those
It's
moments.
just like getting it just
Are,
at
are
the
you
right
are you
time.
familiar with that photo?
I am. Yeah, I've seen that
Okay.
many
Okay.
times. Yeah. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's really unique because you just don't see that side of Michael very often.
Right. Right. And then at that same time, so there's a book that came out last year by the writer Harriet Manning. It's called Michael Jackson and the Blackface Mask, and she used one of my images for the cover. And it's from that same session, and he's like pushing his fist towards the camera, and the fist is out of focus, and his face is in focus, and that's kind of like another like really really powerful moment.
Mm.
There were during the Scream video, there were a lot of really, really incredible moments, and there were a lot of really tender moments between him and Janet that were not for the video itself, but they were having a blast and stuff like that. So part of my job was also to capture what was happening behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, to get both
So
sides of it. Right.
exactly,
And
exactly.
so would Michael just sort of pitch ideas for photos for you, and you'd just have to sort of create that whole production and like bring his
The
ideas to life? Or how
the
did that
only
work?
time, well, so when we were shooting videos, the idea for the video is already been written out and storyboarded and all of that.
Yeah.
And in that case, my job is to be there and to be on alert and to just look at everything and notice everything and see what what is happening and then be ready with the camera to shoot the picture.
Yeah.
Um, for things like the rarest single that one can buy is the
Smile.
Smile single.
Yeah.
For that, Michael called me on the phone, said, let's talk. And we spoke the first time we spoke about doing the Smile single cover. We talked for, I don't know, a couple of hours. And
Wow.
then I went and put together all of the elements for it. And it took weeks and weeks to just gather everything that we needed to do that.
Yeah.
So sometimes he would have something specific. Sometimes he would just be like, let's just shoot.
Yeah.
A lot of the work that I did in New York while he was recording the history record, um, the cover for the single "You Are Not Alone" was just a portrait that I did. Um, Basically, every few weeks, I would fly to New York. We would set up a studio. He would come in, and he'd usually bring several different outfits. And at that time, he was kind of trying to move away from the more military look that
Yeah.
he had been wearing into more of a fashion sense.
Mm.
And And so we shot a lot of different things, a lot of cool jackets and shirts and stuff like that. And that particular shot that was used for You're Not Alone was just one that and once I shot them, he would have the film and he would look at it and decide what he liked and what he didn't like. And
Right.
one day I was like, oh, that got dropped. Oh, cool, that's my shot. Yay, that's nice.
Yeah.
So it wasn't it what
He
we
just sort
didn't
of
have any
handed it over to
discussion about
Michael.
this is what we want to use for this,
Mm,
So
that makes sense. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And so you're talking about these the short films, the video
Mhm.
shoots.
Yeah.
How did the Michael behind the camera differ to the Michael on camera? Was it like a different person almost?
Um, the I guess that the thing is that it's like when he was like when the camera was rolling, he was in a role. He was in the role that he was playing. I mean, as far as I know, Michael never went into space. So the so the person that he was portraying when he was in the Scream video was a space person who's locked on a rocket with Janet.
Right.
Um, the one the one that I get asked about the least that I think was really just an extraordinary short film
Yeah.
was the childhood. Have you seen my childhood?
Yeah.
And that was really interesting because that was a very, very personal song for him.
Very vulnerable as well.
And the weird thing was is that where we shot that, it was at a Lutheran church camp that was up in the mountains north of Los Angeles, and it just happened that I used to work there. I had worked at this church camp in the summer between getting out of the military and going to university, and like I get this fax that says go to this location. And I'm like, and I get there and I'm like, oh my God, I used to work here. That was just weird and bizarre.
Yeah.
But in that, I think that he really let the world see kind of like more of his inner self.
Yeah.
When and and you know, that was not like I think that that was probably one of the more honest portrayals of himself that he ever
Mm.
let be seen on camera.
Like not
Um,
putting on a front or putting on a character as much.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
But the thing about Michael is that he was a very, very deep and complicated person.
Yeah.
And so, you know, who's to say like that one person is one thing that he shows to the world is authentically him and one other thing isn't. We're all a
Mm.
little bit different in different
Yeah.
situations. um I'm if I'm shooting, I'm a little bit more outgoing. If I'm just in normal life, I'm kind of quiet and shy.
Mm.
And so it's like, well, both are honestly who I am.
It's just
So
different sides of your personality, right?
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so like you know, Michael would be a lot of different things. I mean, he was extremely, extremely intelligent. He knew about so many different subjects and so many different things.
Mm.
And also, you know, and I don't consider even that we were friends. I feel like we got to know each other a little bit during the short time that I worked for him, but I didn't know him for very long. And I think that we had a really good working relationship. But like when Michael passed, a lot of people were like, "Oh, we were best friends," and all
Mm.
that. And I don't know. I just wouldn't portray that
Yeah.
because I think that I respected him very much as an artist and as a person. And what I sensed was that he sort of needed to he, that he needed to have people that around him that weren't taking. And so
Mm.
I tried to like not ever take from him. I never asked him
Yeah.
for an autograph. I never asked him to take a picture with him. I didn't do any of that, because it just seemed like there was always people like, Michael, do this, Michael, sign that, Michael, do
Yeah.
that.
I admire that.
Want
Yeah.
to do that. I didn't want
Absolutely.
to do that. So,
Yeah.
and I try not to do that with any celebrity,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, who cares about
Well,
their
they're just a
signature on a
person.
piece of paper? And yeah, and but it's like, if I do get a chance to talk to them, to somebody who's famous,
Mm.
then I probably will talk to them about philosophy, or a good book that I've read,
Yeah.
or something like that, rather than like, oh, you did that movie,
Yeah.
and they've already talked about that movie about 700,000 times,
Yeah.
so it's kind of nice to just be like, just
Just
treat
as
people like
people.
they're normal. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's
So,
fascinating. Yeah. And so, moving on from Michael, what would you say is the biggest thing you sort of took from that experience and sort of carried with you in your career since?
um, also a very good question. Um, there are several things. First of all, when I speak to groups of fans, one of the things that I always talk about was that every time I worked on a music video or any project with Michael, there were people of every religion, there were people of every race, there were people of every sexual orientation. There were everybody was represented, and everybody was welcome. And while I always kind of had that kind of an ideology in my heart, seeing Michael actually put that into action
Yeah.
has always really stayed with me. And so my message to fans is, if you want to be representing what Michael's ideology is, then you should be for inclusivity. You
Mm.
should care about our planet, because Michael was very, very much into caring about our planet.
Yeah.
You should practice radical love, and that's and those are the things that sort of like have permeated, not just in my brain, but into my heart and my soul.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that, like it or not, I will always be, for the rest of my life, associated
Mm.
with this person that I work with, even though done a lot of other things, and my
Yeah.
period of time working with Michael was really short.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing that I'm most known for. And so it's
Mm.
like, okay, well, I want to represent Michael well, and
Yeah.
represent my time well. And it's not like it's a big effort to be inclusive and all that, but it's like, no, I kind of have come to the conclusion, this is how we're supposed to be as good
Mm.
and decent human beings. And so it's like, that's a big thing that I take from having
Yeah.
worked with Michael. The
Wow.
other thing
That's
is,
wonderful.
the other thing is that everything is temporary. I knew the day that Michael hired me that every single thing in life has a beginning and a middle and an end. And I knew that the day that he hired me, that there would be a day that I didn't work for him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, okay, I don't want to cling on to this like it's the only thing that I'm ever going to do, or like it's everything, because everything in life is temporary.
Mm.
And so when my time working with him was done, it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? What's the next thing? And what the next thing was for me was taking a year sabbatical and going and doing volunteer work with a nonprofit foundation. And
Mm.
that sort of cleared my head. And
Yeah.
then moving on and doing completely the next consistent thing that I did after working for Michael was I did architectural photography, and
Wow.
and
Okay.
published 6 books of architectural photography.
Wow.
And I
That's
and I
phenomenal.
love doing that. And then
Yeah.
started getting pulled back into doing music again, and did a lot of work with dancers, but there was, and each of those things, everything is temporary. And because I didn't think, oh gosh, I got hired to work for Michael, this has got to be my permanent gig. I didn't want to, like, it would have been really, really a bad thing to think that, because everything in life is temporary.
Yeah. So you
So
kind of prepared then, in a way.
yeah, Yeah.
Well,
I'm
Stephen,
seeing we have a 1 minute and 30
yeah, we've got
seconds left.
1 minute 30
Is
seconds
that
left
is
before
that
we
a
cut
hard
it.
out? Does the recording end then or
I think it does. I think it kicks us off.
okay.
But
Wow.
it's
Okay.
been such a pleasure talking with you. It's been really, really interesting. And so I thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us.
Oh, no problem. And if you ever want to have a conversation again and talk about other things,
Yeah,
I mean, it's
absolutely.
funny
We'll have to
because
do a
we talked
follow-up.
about things that we didn't cover. A lot of times there are questions that people ask that sort of follow the same sort of
Yeah,
trajectory, and we sort of jumped around, and I
yeah.
like that. It was a very real and authentic
I
conversation.
appreciate
So
that. Yeah, thank you. I loved
well done.
talking with you. And do you have a website or anywhere fans can see your work?
Yes, it's spwhitsitphoto.com. What I'm going to do is I'm going to since we're pre-recording this, I'm going to send you a link, and
Perfect.
I do have photos that are for sale, original photos of Michael, that I'm happy to make and send all over the
Yeah,
world. So
that's
that's my
amazing.
shameless self-promotion, but I'll go ahead and send you a link to that, and if you want to drop
Yeah.
it in, then
I'll put
you can
everything
do
on
that.
screen here for everyone to see and click on. Perfect.
Brilliant.
Thank you
Brilliant.
so much, Stephen, and have a
All right.
wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for
Okay.
this. I really
Thank you. Take
appreciate it.
care. Be well.
Take care. Before we continue with the interview, let's take a quick break to thank the sponsor of this video, Michael Jackson Market. Michael Jackson Market are a business created by passionate fans who believe that you should have access to the best quality Michael Jackson memorabilia items at a great price. They provide you with the opportunity to get unique Michael Jackson memorabilia items really easily. You can go to their website www.michaeljacksonmarket.com to browse their countless items and even get your hands on one of their Michael Jackson subscription boxes, which are packed with fun items. Each box comes with a custom t-shirt and 7 or 8 other items. So whether it's Michael Jackson Funko Pops, books, cups, chocolate, mini basketballs, gym bags, tote bags, washcloths, stickers, lanyards, pins, t-shirts, or even a keychain of Bubbles the Chimp, don't forget to head to www.michaeljacksonmarket.com and use code REDJACKSON for $10 off all items above $50. Again, that's code REDJACKSON for $10 off all items over $50. Thank you to Michael Jackson Market for sponsoring Red Jackson Dance for 2025.